Welcome back. We continue now. A leading and popular Cape Town women's rights lawyer, arts patron and doting patriarch, Peter Truman, finds his utopian world turned upside down. Usually adept at coping the pressures amount whilst caring for his beloved wife Amanda in her cancer recovery and still being the perfect father to their daughter. So extended to the limit, he accedes to his PA's insistence to hire an au pair. The Icelandic physiotherapy student is cheeky, witty, and like Peter, distinctly musical. She's soon embraced into the daily lives of the Truman family, but her arrival has unintended consequences as Peter falls victim to both his strengths and his weaknesses. So that is the gist of Owen Salmon's novel, A Weakness to Die For. He's going to be joining us now virtually to chat a little bit more about his offering. Owen, good morning. Thanks for your time on the SABC at this hour.
Good morning, Liesl. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm honored to be on Morning Live, really.
Owen, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for this beautifully written work of literature art. It is really indicative of what the story is all about, the journey that you take us as well. So I want to judge the book by its cover. Talk to us about the title, A Weakness to Die For. Help us understand that further.
Thank you, Liesl. Yeah, the A Weakness to Die For, I suppose it has the dual element of having a pun on, something to die for, but
yeah.
That chocolate cake is to die for. And of course, also there is the death of somebody. And we know, no spoilers, we know that we know from the first page of the book at least that there is a death. And the book is about an inquest into that death, the death of the au pair. So the title was A Weakness to Die For, playing on somebody's or a weakness which gave rise to the death, perhaps, and the story will unfold to reveal I suppose the meaning of the title.
Absolutely. Thank you for not giving away too much. I want to bring you the protagonist, Peter Truman's internal conflict that also rises early on in the book. The struggle to stay true to what he perceives himself to be, but obviously he has to face his own demons, delve into his own darkness. Talk to us about the evolution of his character throughout the book as well.
Liesl, it was an interesting development, an interesting story arc, as well as a development of the character arc. Peter he's the doyen of his profession. He's a leading advocate at the Cape Town bar. He's a women's rights lawyer, as you introduced him just now. And for all intents and purposes, he has a perfect existence. His nickname behind his back, amongst all his colleagues at the Cape Town bar, is Peter Perfect. And that certainly ostensibly seems to be the picture that he portrays. But of course, as we all know, life is not perfect and human beings are not perfect. And so the deep, dark past that you referred to of being Peter's past sort of slips out through the cracks in various ways through the story as he battles with his own internal conflict and his torment, because he falls in love with the au pair that is introduced into their family life. But his family life is, on the one side, the most important thing to him, his love for his wife and his love for his daughter. And so as the story unfolds, we see Peter's difficulty and torment in the story is about success and failure and attachment to his family and attraction, the simultaneous attraction to this young and very attractive and cheeky and interesting and intriguing au pair. And so Peter's character develops throughout the story until the end and the conclusion. It as perhaps I'm not sure whether I mentioned the story is set around an inquest into the death of the au pair. We see in the opening scene, we see the au pair's death, it's the death scene. And then the story is about an inquest. And of course, Peter Truman, who was at the death scene, is implicated. But there's several possible main characters in the story who could have brought about the death, directly or indirectly. And that's what the inquest is about. And it's told from Peter's lens. In other words, in the first person, looking back at the events through as we go through the book. The story is told that way.
Well, speak to us about the choice of style then, using that first person flashback. How it added dimensions to the book from your as you wrote it.
That was, in all honesty, it was an interesting journey. The book had not always been written in the first person. And I was at sort of developmental stages of the writing. I was having a little bit of trouble with there are four main characters in the book, and I was having a bit of trouble identifying through whose lens I would be telling the story, whose point of view I would be engaging with the story. And I was working with a developmental editor back at that particular point in time, and I think she dropped the seed of, well, you know, you're an advocate, you understand legal processes. Although the main character Peter is an advocate, and so that was a world that I could write to.
Yes.
Why don't you bring some sort of legal proceedings, because people like legal proceedings? Why don't you bring that kind of thing into it? And then I read a book by Sir Kazuo Ishiguro called The Remains of the Day, where he wrote that story, and I mean, it's just an outstanding book. Of course, he wrote the story in a flashback from the first person.
Yes.
And when I read that, and I was toying with the idea of doing this, of having an inquest into the death of Morgan, who is the Icelandic au pair. And things just started falling in place, that I realized that I had to introduce an inquest, and I had to do it in this first person, the flashback, in the same way. And it just worked perfectly. And once that fell into place for me, that writing style, for want of a better expression, it just, then everything came together.
For me, I thoroughly enjoyed, being privy or being a fly on the wall to the chambers, the court proceedings, etc. during that inquest. And you also lead us through an emotional maze. The major theme ultimately also encaptured by the epigraph, which is written: the men in ships, they heard us sing and they could not resist the sound, and so they called us dangerous. When it's they who lack control. Talk to us a little bit more about that, how the family matters get resolved, but without giving away too much.
Well, I mean, that's in a way is very much the underlying theme of the book. Is, the men in ships, they heard us sing, and they could not resist the sound, and so they called us dangerous when it's they who lack control. And so very much an underlying theme of the stories. I mentioned just now, Peter Truman, the protagonist, having this conflict within himself about his infidelity, and but his seeming inability to stop the infidelity. I mean, he takes advice from his best friend. He takes advice and really tries to get on top of it, and from his sister, who's a clinical psychologist, and he just does not seem to be able to get on top with it, and so his conflict and his torment deepens. And it's again playing back onto this attachment versus attraction thing. We have. I'm not a biologist by any means, but the research that I did in researching for the story instructed me on the fact that we as human beings have hormonal setups that allow us, and in fact provide for us, to have a very solid attachment to family. And to dear loved ones, such as a wife of many years would be, and yet at the same time have an attraction to somebody else.
Owen, in the interest of time, I just want to come in there quickly, just to get to another important point of the book, because, there's a strong contrast between the strong women characters vis-a-vis the GBVF undercurrents in South Africa's societal context. Talk to us about that, but also the proceeds, from the book and the works around that. Talk to us about how that also influenced your donations going forward, just very quickly.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Lisa.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's the book is not about gender-based violence, but there is gender-based violence in the book. And at a stage in going through the developmental stage of developing the plot and developing the story and the character trajectories, I started, because there is this death, and there's a number of people who could have brought about the death, and it's the death of a woman. And I then, my eyes were really opened very wide to the scourge that exists not only in South Africa but internationally, because in doing the research I came across a lot of literature about, and statistics, some of which are mentioned in the end note to the book, and the bibliography of that I read, which kind of opened my eyes to the scourge of gender-based violence, because I was aware of it. I think like we all are aware of it, but I was not, and I didn't kind of interface with it certainly not in my professional existence at the bar, and certainly not in my personal life. But it is a very, very real threat to our society. And so my pledge to the women's shelter movement of the Western Cape, of the story set in the Western Cape, was kind of a statement on my behalf, in a way, if I can be candid, to say, this is something which is, I think all needs to. It was something that I felt that I could, something that I could do.
I have to interject there. I have to leave it there. Time is just a scarce commodity. But thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for penning thoughts to paper. Author Owen Salmon there, just chatting to us about his novel, A Weakness to Die For. Really, really interesting read, and a work of literature art. Again, thank you to him for joining us at this hour.